Welcome to level 1 of this Backend API project. In this level, we will focus on setting up all of our development environment so that we have the tools and dependencies ready in order to create this project. And then in each of the following levels, we're going to expand upon the API and make it a little bit better every time by introducing new technologies and new concepts. But for this first video, as I said, just the setup, and then we'll also create the very basic or just the core of our API that we will then improve upon later on. But enough talking, let's just get right into it. And the first thing I want to do is to make this directory, turn it into a Git repository. So I'll use the git init command, and this will then initialize an empty Git repository so that I can keep track of my changes. But I also want to create a git ignore file. So I'll do a touch git ignore, because there are some files that I don't want Git to keep track of. And let's open up this git ignore file. And in here, I just want to add the node modules and the build folder. So once I've done that, I'll close that down. And the next step is to start installing some of the dependencies that we're going to need. The first one I want to install is TypeScript, because we're going to use TypeScript in this project. And there's an important detail here, and that is that I want to install TypeScript globally. So I'll do an npm and then do I for install, and then TypeScript, and then do -g for global. And this will install TypeScript and make it available for my whole computer. And this is very important for one of the commands, the command line interface commands that come with TypeScript, called TSC, which we'll be using to compile our TypeScript. And the next thing I want to do is to turn this directory into an npm package as well. So I'll do an npm init, and it will then ask me a couple of questions. First, it will ask me for the name of the package, and I'll just call it Bookshelf API Project, which is the name of this folder that I'm currently in. So that is fine. Version 1 is fine. Description, I'll just put in an Express API example project. You can put anything you want in here, doesn't matter. Entry point will be the file that has to be started in order for you to turn on your API. So this will be the starting point of your API. Normally, this will be index.js. I'll just change this to server.js just because I can. And again, you can always change this. So test command, I will leave out. Git repo, I will skip this, skip the author, skip the license, and this is okay. So now that we have this done, we also get this package.json file. As you can see, it was generated over here. And in this file, we will have all of the dependencies and some different scripts and some details about our project. So the next thing I want to do is to install Express, because we're going to use Express as the API technology. In order to do that, I will again in my terminal do npm I and then Express like this. And this will install Express as a dependency. And let's see what we get. Yes, as you can see in the package.json, we have this dependency now with Express. And then because we're using TypeScript, I also need the types for this Express package. To install that, I'll do npm and then I, and then I'll do --save and then -dev. And this will save this as a development dependency because we only need it while we're developing. And then I'll do @types and then /express. So this is the final command that I'll execute. I will install it as a dependency, and it will be the types for Express. And in just a second, you should see that we now have another object down here with the development dependencies. Perfect. And then there's one more development dependency that I would like to install, which is called NodeMon, just like this. So I'll again do an npm I with the dev dependency flag, and then do NodeMon. And this will install NodeMon that we're going to use later on. And once that is ready, we'll go to the next step, which is to create our TypeScript configuration file. And remember, when we installed the TypeScript dependency, we did that globally. That's why it's not here in the package.json. But we can use a tool or a command line tool that comes from that package that is called TSC. And then I would like to initialize my config for TypeScript. So I'll do a TSC init, and this will then create this file called tsconfig.json. And this file has all the settings for how you want your TypeScript compiler to compile your TypeScript into JavaScript. And as you can see, there are a lot of options in here. We will just skip most of them, but one that is important is this root directory, which we will specify as being the source. And we will create this folder very soon, where we'll put in all the files, all the source code for our API. Then I also want to change the one called out.dir down here on line 58. And this one will be the destination, or the folder that all the compiled TypeScript code goes into. So the JavaScript code will be put into this folder. And this one we will just call build. And then we'll close down this file after doing those two changes. And now we're actually ready to start creating some of the code for the API. So I will create that directory called source. I'll do an mkdir for make a directory called source, and then I'll do a touch, and then inside of the source directory we will create a file called server.ts, and I should not put that slash there, like this. And as you can see, we now have the server.ts file, and we can open that up. In here is where we'll start creating our API. And to do that, I will create a variable called app, and I will assign that to express and then brackets in order to fire off this express function. And of course, we are missing an import here, so I'll just do add import like this. And now that we have that import, the error is gone, and we can start using this app. And the way that it works is that we specify endpoints that the app will listen to. And then the app or the API will respond with something specific. So the way you do it is by doing app.get, for example. This will allow us to listen for a get request. And then we'll do quotes, where we'll specify the path that we're listening to for this endpoint. And this one we'll put as books. And then you also give an callback function. And this one we will just make as an anonymous function with a rec and a res. It's typical that you call these parameters like this: request for request, or rec for request, and res for response. And when you get a request for this endpoint, all the information about that request will be in this object. And similarly, we can use this response object in order to respond back to the user or to the client that requested something from the API. So the way we can do it is we type res.status, because I first want to set the status. Did it go well or did it go bad? And I'll put in a status code of 200, which means that the call to this endpoint was all good, nothing went wrong. And finally, we'll do .json, and this will then return some JSON back to whoever requested this endpoint. And in here, we will put in some books. And I'll just define those books now, and they will look like this. So we have this books array, which includes these two objects that have title, author, and a Boolean value called published, which is just to show if this book has been published or not. So this is what we will return as JSON back to whoever made this request. And as the last thing before this will start working and before we can start this API, is that we need our app to listen. So we have to do an app.listen like this, and then we have to specify a port number that the app or the API will be listening to. So I'll just create a small constant up here called port, and I'll assign this to 3000 like this. And then we will put in this variable here. And then again, we will do a callback function. And this one will just do a console.log just to show us that now the server is running. So we will do server is running on port, and then we'll do like this and put in the port number like this. That is actually all we need in order to create this first very basic API. Now we just need to run it to see if it works. So to do that, I would first like to compile my TypeScript, because this right now is TypeScript code, but we wanted to execute it as JavaScript. So the way I do it is I use the tsc command, and right now if I just fire that or just execute it, it will then use the configuration that we have in the tsconfig file, and it will compile the TypeScript into JavaScript code, and it will put it into this build folder. And as you can see over here, we have this server.js file. And this is our compiled TypeScript, which has been compiled into JavaScript code. And of course, we can go down into the terminal and we can do node, build, and then server.js, and then we can actually run this server. So now we get this console.log statement that we put in the listen, so the one that we got right here. And it says that we're listening on port 3000. So if we open up Google Chrome, and this is just from before I was testing this, but if we open Chrome and have a look at localhost 3000, we agree with this cannot get slash. And that is because currently we don't have anything listening to just slash. which is the root of the endpoint. But instead, if we actually do /books, then you can see we actually get back the JSON from those books. And that is because we have specified that we are listening for an endpoint that is /books. We're not listening for just /. If we were listening to that, then we should omit this books part. But since we want to specify that, then the user also has to go to this endpoint. So that is how that is going to work. But before we continue and make one more endpoint, there's something I would like to change. And that is that currently, if we make a change to our code in the TypeScript file, we manually need to compile it again, and then we need to shut down the server or the JavaScript API and then turn it on again. And that is a very slow process if we have to do that manually. So I want to set up a system that will do it automatically. So what we'll do is we will stop this server that is running right now. Then we will do a tsc command in order to compile, but we'll do it with a -w flag. And this flag is the watch flag, and this will ask the TypeScript compiler to keep looking at our TypeScript files, and every time there's a change, it will then recompile the files and turn them into JavaScript. So this means every time we save, we get the newest changes directly as JavaScript. So let's start that. And as you can see, it says here that we're starting the compilation in watch mode. So now, every time we make a change, we get the JavaScript files. But we also want to restart the JavaScript server. So let's create one more terminal. I have opened up 2 terminals. So the first one will be the TypeScript in watch mode, and the second one will then be NodeMon. And NodeMon will look on the JavaScript files and restart the server every time there's a change to the JavaScript files. So if we open up our package.json file, in here you can see we have some scripts, and we'll just add one more script to this. So I'll put a comma, and then I'll make a new script called dev, and I'll specify that this will be NodeMon, and it will run build server.js. So when we run the dev script, it will ask NodeMon to start this build/server.js file. And every time there's a change in the JavaScript file, it will restart it. And that's the key. So if we open up the terminal again and do npm run dev, it will then run the NodeMon command. And as you can see, we now again have that the server is running on port 3000. And now every time we make a change in the TypeScript, we will automatically compile it to JavaScript, and then NodeMon will restart the JavaScript. And this gives us a very fast response and allows us to develop very quickly and immediately get to see the changes. That's very powerful. So let's go ahead and create one more endpoint that will allow you to grab a specific book based on an ID. So I'll just copy down this endpoint, and I'll do books/ and then do :ID. And this allows us to grab the ID from the routing parameters in the URL. And in order to do that, we will use this request object. So we will make a variable called ID, and we'll assign this to the request and then .params, because we can use JavaScript destructuring to grab this ID from the params object. So now that we have the ID, we can now return that index of the books, and we'll keep it very simple, and we'll just say that the ID 0 will be the first book, ID 1 will be the second book, so just the index of the array. So instead of returning json.books, let's create a new variable called foundBook and assign this to the books array, but then we will grab the ID, the index of ID. And currently when we get this ID, it will be a string, and we cannot use that string to index our array. So we have to typecast this into a number. So I'll just do number in front like this, and this will then typecast it into a number. And of course, this will not work if the user is actually putting in something that is not a number, if they write a word or anything else that is not allowed to be typecast into a number. Then this will throw an error, and of course we have a problem. But we will fix that in the next levels that are coming. For now, we'll just hope that the user is actually going to use the API in the way that it's supposed to. All right. So now that we have this found book, we can of course return it instead of returning the books. And as you can see, every time we made a change, the TypeScript compiler recompiled, and then the NodeMon has restarted. As you can see, every time I press Control S to save, the server is actually restarting, and we get this console.log message. So this means that over here in the browser, we should now be able to actually hit an endpoint. Let's try with 0, and get the first book, and we do get that first book. And let's try with number 1, and we also get the second book. So our whole system has restarted, and we got our newest changes live into our development environment. So that's very powerful and very good. And one last thing that I would like to add is to put the types on these variables, the request and the response. So this one will be of type request that we get from Express. And similarly, over here, the response will also be the response that we get from Express. Notice it's important that you import the one from Express, the Express package. And as you can see, this has now updated our import statement above. And let's also just add this to the second endpoint. And we'll put in the response like this. That makes it a little bit better and makes use of the strict typing that TypeScript gives us. And that was actually the end for level 1. Congratulations on getting this far. I would now encourage you to try to create some more of these endpoints by yourself. Make sure that you turn this project into your own. Don't just follow what I'm doing. Also do that, but then expand upon it and make it bigger and turn it into your own thing. That is how you will learn a lot from following this tutorial series. So that is my recommendation. Look into the documentation of Express and see if you can create some more endpoints, some GET endpoints, but maybe also some of the other types of HTTP requests that are out there. So that is my small recommendation for you. And otherwise, I'll just see you in the next one.